Today we'll be looking at the final theme in our chess pieces series, and this one is for the pawn. I consider the pawn to be the most noble piece on the board. Even though it's the lowest ranked piece, it often is the first to step into battle, and if it makes it across the board, it can be promoted to one of the highest ranked pieces on the board. I've titled this The Pawn at First Light. And the idea is our pawn is waiting for the battle to begin as dawn rises, and it's contemplating its place on the board and in the world, so it has a very pensive feeling to it. So let's look at the music and the ideas behind it. I'll be using a technique in this piece called modal mixture. Now that's something we've touched on before, where we've borrowed chords from a parallel mode, or we've called it modal interchange. They're really the same thing, it's just semantics. But I like the term modal mixture because in this piece, I'm not considering one mode more important than another. So I'll be borrowing from both Dorian and from Aeolian in this piece. And the difference between those two modes is really just one note. The D Aeolian scale, or natural minor scale, is D, E, F, G, A, B flat, and C. Now the only difference between the D Aeolian and D Dorian scale is that that sixth degree, the B flat, is now raised to a B natural. So it would be D, E, F, G, A, B natural, and C. One of the things I really like about the D Dorian sound and how it works for this piece is it's a beautiful combination of dark and light. So in the D Aeolian mode, we have a D minor for the 1 chord and a G minor for the 4 chord. Whereas in Dorian, we would have a D minor for the 1 chord and a G major for the 4 chord. And there's this kind of uplifting feeling when we hit that major sound of the 4 chord. Let's take a look at where the chords come from in these first 8 measures. This first chord, the D sus2, you can consider that D minor. I'm just delaying the minor third, this F, to make this chord sound a little bit more ambiguous. So that could come from either our D Dorian or our D Aeolian modes. Same with the G sus4. It's not until we hit this G major with the B natural, that raised 6th degree of the Dorian scale, that it's starting to say, oh, this is the Dorian mode. Same with this F major 13 sharp 11. We've got that sharp 11 in the melody, the B natural. So again, it's feeling like Dorian here. It's not until we hit this B flat major 9 sharp 11 that we get that Aeolian sound with the lowered 6th degree, this B flat in the bass, we've got a B flat grace note, we've got a B flat in the melody. So this says that it's D Aeolian. The A minor 7 and the D minor add 9 could both come from either mode. This A7 sus4 is interesting because on face value, it looks like it could come from either mode. But if you look in the melody, we've got this B flat. So that says it comes from D Aeolian. And over this chord, you might play an A Phrygian scale, which would have the same notes as our D Aeolian. Let's listen to this and see how seamlessly this modal mixture of D Dorian and D Aeolian works. I think you can hear how those two modes work beautifully together. We've got the darkness of the minor sound, but then with that Dorian raised 6, we get the light on that 4 chord, that major 4 chord, and then Aeolian overall being a darker mode. So it really works with the theme of at first light. As the dawn rises, as the light comes, so comes the darkness of battle. The most common form of modal mixture is mixing Ionian with Aeolian, borrowing chords from that parallel natural minor mode. But you can mix any parallel modes. Feel free to experiment with that. There's lots of interesting sounds that you can find. Let's move on and look at the B section. We start bar 17 with a G minor chord, which would be the 4 chord of D Aeolian, a very common chord, the 4 chord, to start your next section, your B section on. And then we move to a C over G. Now these two chords have a very interesting relationship. If we look at the first chords in our piece, we went from what we called a D minor here to a G major sound, which is a minor chord to a major chord, a fourth apart, and this has that same relationship, a minor chord to a major chord, a fourth apart. So you could hear this as having modulated to G Dorian, even though these chords work with our D Aeolian and D Dorian modal mixture. Moving on, we get these very unusual looking chords, an A flat major 7 sharp 5, we've got an A flat 7 sharp 5 over G flat, and a D9 flat 5. What was I thinking here? I'm looking at the sequence of chords in these two measures as a type of modified line cliché. A line cliché is a really good way of taking a chord and extending it over time by changing its colors. So you may have heard this kind of sound before, where you have an A minor to an A minor major 7 to an A minor 7 to an A minor 6. So we've got this descending chromatic line. And that can be either at the top of the voicing or at the bottom of the voicing like I have here. So I've taken that idea and just changed it up a little bit. So we do start with A minor, but then we make a slight change by making this an A flat major 7 sharp 5. Then we go to this C over G, and I've left the A out of this because I don't want it to have this major second movement in the bass going to another major second in the bass. I liked the voice leading of going from that G to the G flat and A flat. So we've got that sound, and then that moves to this sound, A flat 7 sharp 5 over G flat. So we've used that descending chromatic line, but we've got some different chords here. And this A flat 7 sharp 5 leads very nicely with a dominant function back to our G minor chord. And just to make it even more obvious that I'm using this as a dominant sound, I put the D on the bottom of that voicing, and I get this D9 flat 5. And then that just moves right back to our G minor sound. So you can see how you can take these music theory ideas of this descending minor line cliché, and then you can modify it to work with your piece. Let's take a listen to that. We'll start back at the B section, listening to just the chords, moving back to this G minor chord through this chromaticism that was originally inspired by a minor line cliché. Finally, let's look at the last 8 measures of the piece. We start with the same melody and chords as the beginning of the piece until we come to this B flat major 13 chord and this long ascending line, which denotes the rising of the sun or the coming of the dawn. This final A is supported by a D flat major 13 flat 5 sharp 5 chord, which of course doesn't come from any of the theory we've been talking about. I chose that chord simply because I like it. Everything doesn't have to fit into a neat theoretical box. Many times your ears are your best decision makers. Most of the harmony that we talk about comes from hundreds and hundreds of years of people looking back at music that's already been written and then trying to understand how it works. I hope you'll come along next time for the orchestration of this piece. There should be some fun surprises. Until then, let's remember the story behind it, of our pawn who's contemplating his place on the board and his place in the world as the sun rises, revealing the darkness of battle. And now the pawn at first light.